What if the same skills that taught a woman to read the sky, to see storms before they formed, to find pattern in chaos, suddenly became the exact tools she needed to understand something no weather instrument has ever measured? A meteorologist with 23 years of reading atmospheric signals found herself one afternoon standing somewhere beyond every coordinate she had ever charted. And what she was shown there arrived in the specific language of her profession: patterns, seasons, systems gathering toward release, 7 events coming in March 2026, shown to her with the quiet precision of someone who controls every weather system that has ever formed. Today's story comes from Dr. Sarah Ellen Morse. And now, let's hear what she experienced. My name is Dr. Sarah Ellen Morse, and I need to tell you something about the kind of person I was before that September afternoon, because I think it matters for everything that follows. I spent 23 years as a senior meteorologist for a regional forecasting center in the American Southeast. And in those 23 years, I developed a quality of pattern recognition that became less like a professional skill and more like a second language. The language of pressure systems and jet streams and the invisible atmospheric forces that shape what falls from the sky and when. I was a person who trusted data, who believed in the measurable, who found genuine comfort in the reliability of physical laws. Meteorology suited my temperament exactly because it was a discipline that rewarded patience and precision, and the willingness to sit with complexity until its underlying order revealed itself. I had little professional tolerance for approximation, for the confident claim that outran its evidence, for the dramatic forecast that served attention rather than accuracy. These values had served me well across 23 years of work that I was genuinely proud of. My faith was real and consistent and quiet. The faith of someone who had grown up in a church-attending family and had maintained that inheritance through adulthood without particular drama in either direction. I prayed, I attended, I believed, but I held my faith in a separate room from my professional life and had never expected the two to collide in any way that would require me to fundamentally rearrange my understanding of either. Until one September afternoon, when a quiet shift in my physical experience led me somewhere that both my professional training and my faith were waiting to be permanently changed. The afternoon it happened was a Tuesday in September, and the thing I keep returning to about that afternoon is its complete ordinariness. I had reviewed the morning's satellite data, tracked a developing low-pressure system off the Gulf Coast, prepared the afternoon's forecast, answered emails, refilled my coffee mug twice, everything exactly as it had been on 1,000 prior Tuesdays. The forecasting center hummed with its familiar rhythms, keyboards, radio feeds, the quiet professional language of people who spent their working hours in conversation with the sky. The sensation arrived not as pain and not as alarm, but as something I can only describe as a shift in my own internal atmospheric pressure, a change in the quality of my awareness that was subtle enough to observe before it was significant enough to name. I set my pen down on the desk with a deliberateness that surprised me, as though some quieter part of me had understood before the rest of me caught up that the pen would not be needed for what was coming. My colleagues later told me that I had become very still, that the stillness had been the first thing they noticed, that I had simply stopped in a way that ordinary absorption in work doesn't produce. My awareness began loosening from its physical context with the specific gentleness of something that had been carefully arranged rather than accidentally occurring. The room growing softer at its edges, the familiar sounds of the forecasting center receding in volume without disappearing entirely, my body becoming something I was aware of rather than something I was inside of. and then even that distinction dissolved. And what remained was an awareness that was entirely and specifically mine. Every year of training, every atmospheric pattern I had ever analyzed, every season of quiet faith I had maintained, all of it present and available, but freed from the specific constraints that had always contained it. What I found when the room was no longer the primary context of my experience was not absence and not darkness, and not the blankness that the removal of physical sensation might logically produce. What I found was presence, immediate, pervasive, and more substantially real than the forecasting center I had just left. The specific paradox of a space that had no physical dimensions and yet felt more genuinely inhabited than any room I had worked in across 23 years of professional life. The first quality I registered with my newly expanded awareness was something I recognized from my professional life, but had never encountered at anything approaching this scale. Coherence. The specific quality of a system in which every element related to every other element according to a single, organizing intelligence. In meteorology, I had learned to distinguish between the apparent complexity of atmospheric systems and their underlying coherence. The way what looked like chaos from inside a storm revealed its organizing logic when viewed from sufficient altitude. What I was now within had that quality of underlying coherence extended to everything simultaneously, without exception, without remainder, without any element that didn't express the same organizing intention. Time had changed its behavior in a way that my training immediately attempted to categorize and then immediately recognized as exceeding every available category. In my profession, time was a precise variable. Forecast windows measured in hours, storm systems tracked across specific temporal intervals. The future distinguished from the present by the specific distance between them measured in minutes and days. But what I experienced in that space was time behaving more like the atmospheric landscape I viewed from satellite altitude, spread out, simultaneously present, past and approaching future available for perception, the way a weather pattern spanning a continent is available to the eye that has sufficient altitude to see the whole of it. And within that temporal landscape, something was drawing my attention forward, toward a specific region that held a different quality of light than what surrounded it. Ahead in my story, that region of different light begins to resolve into something specific. And as I go deeper into what I was shown, the 7 things that were revealed to me each arrived with the specific clarity of a signal that has been building for a long time and has finally reached the threshold of visibility. What I received was not delivered as a list or a lecture. It arrived the way significant atmospheric events arrive to the trained observer, each one with its own distinct character, its own unique signature in the data, its own unmistakable quality that distinguished it from everything around it. And together they formed a pattern whose coherence was only fully visible when all 7 were held simultaneously. The space I had entered became more specifically inhabited as my awareness settled into it. And the settling had a quality of recognition rather than discovery, as though I was not arriving somewhere new, but finally perceiving somewhere I had always been in proximity to without having the adequate instruments to register it. I had spent 23 years working with invisible forces, pressure systems, temperature gradients, the atmospheric dynamics that shaped weather without being directly visible, and I had always maintained a professional respect for the reality of what the instruments couldn't directly show. What I was now within was the reality that all of those invisible forces had been pointing toward without any of my instruments being calibrated to make the pointing visible. I became aware of being known with a completeness that had no professional parallel. In my work, I had developed detailed knowledge of atmospheric systems, their histories, their characteristics, their predictable behaviors, and their surprising ones. But the knowing was always asymmetrical. I knew the system. The system did not know me. What I was experiencing now was something entirely different in kind, a knowing that moved in both directions simultaneously with equal completeness. I was being known with the specific precision of something that had been paying close and sustained attention to the particular person I was. Every year of training, every forecast delivered, every season of quiet, faithful showing up, all of it known with the affectionate accuracy of a designer who remains genuinely interested in what the thing they made has been doing with itself. The presence resolved from ambient to personal in a way I have tried many times to describe accurately. The closest I can come is this. It was less like meeting someone and more like finally seeing clearly someone who had been present in the peripheral vision of my entire life, consistently there, consistently attending, and only now, in this space with its different quality of light, becoming fully visible to the part of me that had been looking, I understood the presence as Jesus without the understanding requiring any argument or evidence. It arrived with the specific certainty of direct perception rather than the tentative certainty of concluded reasoning. And what the direct perception communicated before anything else was communicated was simply, "You are known, entirely, and entirely welcome." What happened next arrived with a quality of preparation, as though the space around me were arranging itself to function as a viewing environment. The way a skilled presenter arranges a room before a significant presentation, not dramatically, not with ceremony, but with the specific care of someone who wants the conditions for receiving to be exactly right. I became aware of a shift in the quality of my perception, a deepening of the clarity I had been experiencing, a focusing of attention toward what I can only describe as a forward-facing direction in the temporal landscape I had been given altitude to perceive. The first thing I understood before any specific content arrived was something about the nature of what I was about to receive. I perceived it as information being intentionally offered rather than independently discovered. The difference between being led to a vantage point and stumbling upon one, this was the former, and the intentionality of it communicated something important before the content arrived, that what I was about to see had been prepared for me specifically, calibrated to my particular capacity for reception, offered in the specific language of my professional training, because that was the language in which I would be best equipped to receive and carry it. March 2026 became visible in the temporal landscape with the specific quality of a significant weather system becoming visible on a satellite image as it gathers toward its release. First, as a quality of atmospheric change, then as a distinct and nameable pattern, then with increasing resolution and specificity as the viewing perspective clarified, I could perceive it as a convergence point, a place in the temporal landscape where multiple streams of what I understood as divine preparation were meeting with the specific inevitability of pressure systems that have been on a collision course for days before anyone at ground level has noticed. And within that convergence, 7 distinct things began to take shape with a clarity that has not diminished in the months since that September afternoon. The first of the 7 things I was shown had a quality that immediately translated into the professional language of my training. It had the character of a wave, and I mean that in the specific meteorological sense of a propagating disturbance that moves through a medium and changes the state of everything it passes through. Not violently, not destructively, but with the specific thoroughness of a system that alters the atmospheric conditions of an entire region simply by moving through it. What I perceived was this wave moving through the interior lives of people simultaneously across vast geography, not touching them collectively as a crowd, but reaching each one individually, arriving in the specific form most likely to reach that particular person, through the particular channel that their specific interior landscape had left open. I saw people whose ordinary Tuesday afternoons were interrupted by something they had no category for, a quality of encounter that arrived not through any human organization or program, but directly, personally, with the specific knowledge of the interior life of the person receiving it that only something with complete access to that interior could demonstrate. The quality of what was left behind in each person the wave passed through was the detail I kept returning to. It was not excitement, not the specific emotional charge of a dramatic religious experience. It was something quieter and more durable than either of those. It was the specific quality of a person who has been genuinely met, who has encountered something real as distinct from something produced, and who carries the evidence of that encounter in the changed quality of their presence in every subsequent room they enter. I was shown this wave as the foundation of everything else I was about to see, the thing that made the other 6 possible by producing the people they required. The second of the 7 things had a structural quality that appealed to the part of me trained to understand how systems reach thresholds. In atmospheric science, I had learned that certain changes don't happen gradually, they happen at thresholds. A temperature drops to a specific point, and water that was liquid becomes ice. A pressure gradient reaches a specific differential, and a storm that had been building quietly releases. The second event I was shown had this threshold quality, situations that had been genuinely closed, that had reached what appeared from every available angle to be permanent configuration, suddenly crossing a threshold into a different state. I was shown specific categories of closure giving way. Relationships that had calcified around old wounds suddenly finding a quality of movement that the wounds themselves had seemed to permanently prevent. Professional doors that had been sealed by circumstances entirely outside the control of the person standing at them suddenly. Not easing open gradually, but crossing a threshold into open in a way that had no adequate natural explanation. I was shown people walking through these openings into spaces that had not existed in any form they could previously have imagined, and the quality of their movement through the openings was notable. Not the relieved rush of someone who had been waiting desperately, but the specific measured step of someone who had been prepared by the waiting for exactly the quality of presence the open door now required. The detail that moved me most within this second event was something about the relationship between the period of closure and the quality of the person who emerged from it. I perceived clearly that what had appeared to be obstruction had in most cases been a form of preparation, that the situation that refused to resolve had been doing something in the interior of the person waiting at it, developing a specific quality of character and capacity that the opening would immediately require, and that if the door had opened earlier, before the preparation was complete, the person who walked through it would have been inadequate to what waited on the other side. I have sat with this perception many times in the months since, applying it to the specific closed doors in my own life with a quality of new patience that I had not previously been able to sustain. The third event had an intimacy that distinguished it from the first 2. Those had operated at the scale of the individual and then of the individual's external circumstances. This third thing moved into the smallest and most fundamental unit of human community, the family, and specifically into the specific fractures that families carry as their most private and most persistent wounds. What I was shown was a movement of reconciliation operating within family systems, not the managed reconciliation of people who had decided through reasonable conversation to put something difficult behind them, but something with an entirely different mechanism, arriving not through negotiation or through the careful management of competing grievances, but through a shift in how each person perceived the other. A shift that came not from argument or therapy or the passage of time alone, but from the quality of interior change that the first event had produced in the individuals involved, people who had been genuinely touched at the interior level, finding that the interior change had consequences for their most important relationships that they hadn't anticipated and hadn't sought. I was shown parents and children finding their way back to each other across distances that years of accumulated hurt had made to feel permanent. Siblings who had organized their adult lives around the specific avoidance of each other, discovering that the organizing principle had exhausted itself. Marriages that had settled into the specific managed distance of people who had stopped expecting genuine contact, finding that contact was suddenly available again in a way that neither partner had engineered. The quality of these reconciliations was not the quality of resolution achieved through effort. It was the quality of something that had been waiting patiently for the interior conditions that made it possible, and finding those conditions finally present in March 2026 in a way that the preceding season had been preparing. The fourth of the 7 things had a quality that I recognized from my professional experience in a specific and unexpected way. In weather forecasting, I had always understood that the most important service I could provide was an accurate forecast delivered with appropriate confidence, not the hedged, non-forecast of someone unwilling to commit to a conclusion, not the overconfident forecast of someone performing certainty they didn't have, but the honest assessment delivered with the specific courage of someone willing to be wrong in public in service of getting it right. What I was shown about the 4th event was a movement of this quality of honest courage becoming more available, more accessible, spreading through communities in ways that changed the character of the conversations happening within them. I was shown people choosing honesty at moments when the prior calculation would have suggested managing the situation instead. Not dramatic public honesty, not the performance of courageous truth-telling, but the small interior moments where a person decided what they actually believed and then acted in correspondence with that belief, rather than in correspondence with what the social environment suggested was expected. The accumulation of these small private choices for honesty was visible in what I was shown as a change in the atmospheric quality of the communities in which they were occurring. The way a shift in the temperature of the ocean surface changes the atmospheric conditions over an entire region gradually and then all at once. I was shown communities where the quality of what passed between people in ordinary conversation was changing towards something more genuine, where the gap between what people privately believed and what they publicly said was narrowing in ways that both scared and freed them simultaneously, and where the freedom that the narrowing produced was creating conditions for a quality of genuine community that managed distance relationships could not generate. The 5th event arrived in what I was shown with a specific quality of momentum, as though what I was perceiving had been building pressure for a long time and was approaching the threshold of its release. I had experienced this quality many times in my professional life. The specific atmospheric signature of a system that has been gathering energy quietly and is now approaching the conditions of its expression. And what I was perceiving in this 5th thing had exactly that character, energy that had been accumulating in a specific generation, gathering in the specific form of clarity and conviction and the particular quality of courage that comes from having thought carefully about something for long enough that the thinking has become settled. What I was shown was a generation of young people, specifically people in their late teens through their late 20s, finding a voice that had been developing in the private interior of their individual and collective experience for years and was now ready to enter the larger conversation with a quality that the larger conversation had not yet heard from them. Not the reactive voice of protest, not the performed voice of a generation asserting its distinctiveness, but something with the specific quality of people who had been paying honest attention to something important and had arrived at genuine understanding that they could hold under examination. The content of what this generation was finding voice to say was something I perceived as essentially integrative. They were articulating connections between things that their culture had learned to keep in separate compartments, between the interior life and the exterior world, between ancient wisdom and contemporary urgency, between personal transformation and communal responsibility. I was shown that the specific contribution of this voice to the larger conversation was not a new argument, but a new quality of wholeness, a refusal of the fragmentations that the surrounding culture had presented as the necessary cost of navigating modernity. And the effect of this refusal on the conversations around them was immediately and measurably expansive. The sixth of the 7 things arrived with an intimacy that surprised me, given that I had already been shown 5 things of considerable personal weight. It felt like something being saved for late in the showing because it required the foundation that the first 5 had established to be fully receivable, and its arrival with that quality of being prepared for told me something about its significance before its content became clear. What I was shown was a change in the quality of prayer, not in its quantity or its frequency, not in the theological frameworks people brought to it, but in its quality, in the specific interior character of the communication itself. I had maintained a consistent prayer practice for most of my adult life, the quiet, faithful practice of someone who believed it mattered without always being certain of the mechanism by which it mattered. And what I was shown about the 6th event revealed something about the specific quality that prayer was moving toward in the people I was perceiving that I recognized immediately as different from what I had been practicing. The change was from prayer as a directed transmission toward a potentially receiving party, the specific quality of sending something and hoping it arrived, toward prayer as conversation with someone genuinely present, the quality of communication that exists between people who are confident of each other's presence and have no need to perform for each other or manage the impression they are making. I was shown people whose prayer had crossed a threshold into this quality of genuine conversation, not because they had achieved a higher level of spiritual development, but because the interior changes produced by the events I had already been shown had cleared enough of the performed layer of their spiritual life that what remained was simply honest contact with someone who had been entirely present and entirely attending all along. And the quality of what passed between them in that honesty was unlike anything the performance-maintaining version of their prayer had been able to generate. The 7th and final event was the one I was shown last, and I have thought often since about whether the sequence was deliberate, whether the 7th was last because it was the culmination of everything that preceded it, the natural fruit of a season in which all 6 prior events had been doing their work in individual human hearts and in the relationships and communities those hearts inhabited. What I was shown was a quality of unity, not the organizational unity of merged institutions or aligned denominational positions, not the managed unity of people who had agreed to emphasize what they agreed on and minimize what they didn't, but something with an entirely different character and an entirely different origin, unity that was arising not from the top down through institutional decision, but from the bottom up through the simultaneous interior transformation of individuals who found themselves, without having coordinated it, oriented toward the same center. I was shown people from genuinely different traditions, different theological emphases, different worship cultures, different historical grievances against each other that had been maintained for generations, finding themselves unexpectedly in the same room, not metaphorically but literally, drawn together by the specific quality of the season and by the recognition that the center they were each oriented toward was the same center, and that the things that had organized their separation, while not unimportant, were simply not as load-bearing as the thing that was now organizing their convergence. The quality of this unity was not the forced warmth of people performing ecumenical goodwill. It was the specific and quiet recognition of family members who have been separated by a misunderstanding and are only now understanding what the misunderstanding actually was. After the seventh event, I was given something I hadn't anticipated, and which turned out to be as significant as any single event I had been shown. I was given the view of the pattern they formed together, the specific coherence of the seven as a system rather than a list. And this was the moment in the entire experience that most directly engaged the professional part of me, because the pattern was exactly the kind of pattern I had spent 23 years learning to read. The first event, the wave of direct individual encounter, was the heat source, the energy input that made everything else possible, the way the warming of ocean surface water makes possible the atmospheric systems that form above it. Without it, the other six were systems without energy, structures without the force that gives them motion. The second event, the opening of closed doors, was the pressure differential created by the energy of the first, the specific atmospheric consequence of a heat source introducing movement into a previously static system. The third through fifth events, the healing in families, the emergence of truth-telling, the finding of young voices, were the specific weather that the first two generated, each one a different expression of the same atmospheric shift, each one carrying forward the energy of what had preceded it in a different direction and touching a different region of the human landscape. The sixth event, the change in prayer's quality, was the feedback loop, the mechanism by which the energy of the entire system was sustained and amplified rather than dissipating back to baseline. And the seventh event, the unity arising from below, was the mature expression of the fully developed system, the specific weather that a fully energized and fully developed atmospheric system ultimately produces, and which would not have been possible without every preceding stage having done its work. I want to be honest about what the months following that September afternoon have looked like, because I think the honest account of what a significant experience actually requires in daily life is more useful than a version shaped by what a significant experience is supposed to require. The first demand was intellectual honesty, specifically the intellectual honesty of someone whose professional identity was built on the careful management of claims, of not asserting more than the evidence supported, of maintaining appropriate uncertainty about forward projections. I had to sit with the tension between that professional identity and what I had received in a way that neither dismissed the experience nor overclaimed it, and that sitting took longer than I expected and was less comfortable than I had hoped. I arrived eventually at a position that I can hold honestly, which is that I received something, that what I received had the specific quality of information communicated rather than imagination generated, and that the most intellectually honest thing I can do with it is share it carefully and let people receive it or not according to their own honest assessment. The second demand was more personal and more immediately challenging, which was the demand to examine my own interior life against the 7 events I had been shown, to ask honestly which of the signals of genuine readiness I was exhibiting and which I was falling short of. I am a scientist and I believe in honest assessment, and I have been applying that belief to this question for months. And the honest assessment is that I am further from the interior quality the 7 events describe than I would like to be, and that the distance is smaller than it was in September but larger than I want it to be in March, and that the closing of it is the most important project currently on my professional desk. There is something I find myself wanting to offer to anyone who has been listening to this story as a fellow professional. Someone whose training has given them a particular relationship with evidence and pattern and the claims that outrun their warrant. I understand the quality of skepticism that a person with that training brings to accounts like mine. I brought it myself before September, and I want to speak to it directly rather than around it. What I was shown did not ask me to abandon the professional values that had served me across 23 years of careful work. It asked me to apply them with greater consistency to the full range of what I was experiencing, including the dimensions of experience that my professional training had been quietly excluding from rigorous attention. The pattern I was shown in that space had the same qualities I had spent a career learning to recognize in atmospheric systems: internal coherence, systematic structure, the specific signature of a developing system approaching its expression, and the professional honesty that had served me well in the forecasting center required that I treat this pattern with the same seriousness I would have brought to any system with those qualities. The 7 events I was shown are not items on a prophetic checklist to be tracked from the outside. They are movements in the interior life of the human community that will express themselves outward into every visible dimension of the world. And the question they are asking of anyone who receives this account is not whether they believe the forecast. It is whether they are doing the interior work that genuine readiness requires, the work of the hunger and the releasing and the expanding love and the authentic presence and the settled peace. That together constitute the interior atmospheric conditions from which everything else follows. I spent 23 years reading the sky, and what I was shown is that the most significant weather pattern currently developing is not in any sky that any of my instruments can reach. It is in the interior atmosphere of human hearts, and whether March 2026 finds those hearts ready is the only forecast question that ultimately matters.